Hello everyone, this is my Module 9 case study. Section 1 is summarizing the case. The basics of this case are student A, James, bullies student B, David, into holding his brass knuckles as he's being called to the assistant principal's office. A teacher notices this and notifies the assistant principal, who then calls David to his office via the school police officer. Upon further investigation, they find out that David is holding James's brass knuckles for him. And due to a zero tolerance policy through their school district, both students are required to be expelled for 45 days. They're both to be arrested, which will give them a felony on their record. Section 1 continued. How do you hold yourself and others accountable for ethical behavior? I basically use my moral compass daily. I use it for my own decisions, for my own ethical behavior, and I just started doing this, but I also use it to help other colleagues work out ethical decisions and situations, and to kind of show them how to model it for our students. I chose to include that on this slide because we learn a lot about David. He's kind of an upstanding citizen, an honor student who probably uses his moral compass daily. James, on the other hand, probably has no idea what one is, and if he did, they probably wouldn't be in this situation in the first place. Section 2, report any legal or ethical issues. The legal issue in this case is that students are to be suspended for 45 days and are to be arrested, which will give them a felony due to the zero tolerance policy. The ethical issue in this is that James points out that he bullied David into holding them for him. And he points out that David is merely a victim in this, but because of the policy, that doesn't matter. And that is where the ethics are breached. Section 2 continued. What do you do when you recognize when ethics have been breached, and what appropriate actions do you take? If I recognize ethics have been breached when involving my students, I typically sit down with them, work through it, figure out what happened, hear their side of the story, both sides of the story, if more than one's involved, and then I make a decision internally, and then I walk them through what they could do next time or what they could have done to avoid the situation. As far as with other colleagues, I personally have not witnessed ethics being breached. However, I have had some situations where I was not totally positive that ethics were breached, and I confided in a trusted colleague on this. Section 3, case study summary. Sum it all up in a single sentence. My sentence is, the justice system has been proven to be ineffective through criminalizing an innocent victim that was bullied into holding another student's weapon on school property. The assistant principal has to then make an extremely difficult decision surrounding ethics versus legality. Section 4, synthesizing the facts. The facts that we do know under the people category are David's mother is very involved in his life, much more than James's. This is Richard's first year as the assistant principal at Rocket Junior High. The schoolhouse is 900 students. A portion are from the south side where Richard grew up. James has been a troubled student. He's from the south side, but he's recently been improving his academics and behavior. David, once again, is an honor student, and the school's police officer is very strict and by the book. Some of the facts that we don't know are David's age, what grade the two students are in, nor if they are in the same class. It doesn't really specify that. The teacher that witnessed this exchange could have witnessed it anywhere. It could have been in the hall, could have been in the cafeteria, could have been in the same classroom, could have been anywhere. We have no background on Richard himself, his work history, personal life. There's nothing there. We just know that he grew up on the South Side. Furthermore, there's no evidence of customs, norms, race, yada, yada, yada. The only fact that we know under the place category is that this takes place at a middle school. There is no further information about the physical condition, demographics, nor rural versus suburban. The fact that the middle school has a bus bringing students from the South Side doesn't really tell us much. It could be a town, it could be a suburb. The only thing I could assume is that it's not in an urban setting, but that could be possible too. We have no idea if it's a public or private school as well. Section 4 continued. Steps should be taken to ensure others are acting ethically. There are several steps that need to be taken to ensure that others are acting ethically in any work environment and classroom. For example, in no particular order, each individual needs to know their values, model ethical behavior yourself, provide protective mechanisms that promote open communication, acknowledge and visually reward ethical conduct, uphold promises and commitments. Also, ensure that each individual involved is aware of their moral compass and know how to use it. Section 5 is review and prioritize the information. The conflict, the situation, and the decision could all be potentially damaging to the stakeholders. Depending on what decision is made, the school could lose a great assistant principal. The school could lose a great citizen. With David, if this affects his future, it could send David into a downward spiral. There's a lot of potential damage that this could make. I don't think there was anything else on that. Oh, I put this scenario through Laura Nash's 12 questions model that was discussed in Module 6. And after I put it through all steps, I would make the decision not to fill out the paperwork. However, I started thinking about this scenario in my own personal position, and I don't think I can make a decision based on the facts that I know right now. Section 6, identifying your options and possible consequences. What I would do in this situation, assuming I'm taking the role of Richard, is weigh the harms and benefits of both decisions. That's what I usually do in each ethical decision that I am faced with. I would take into consideration how severe a reprimand is. If it's not too bad, if it's just kind of a slap on the wrist or a bad mark, I would probably take that route to save David's record. If it is pretty bad and could potentially get me fired, I may lean towards the other. However, I do have a third option that I thought of. Since there was a week between this incident and when he was called out on it to fill out the paperwork or get a reprimand, I would have spent that week researching and finding higher authority to go to start to fight this issue and see if I could get a exception written into the zero tolerance policy that would basically save David's of the future in situations like this. Section 6 continued. I've always considered myself an ethical person. I am lucky to have the parents I have and all the other role models that surrounded me in my youth. However, I am very new at cultivating ethical behavior in others. I just started doing this. It's kind of a weak point for me. I'm kind of shy. That has some to do with it, but I'm just now gaining the knowledge on how to do this, so I haven't really had much experience with it. As far as ethical behavior in my students, that's that's a breeze for me. Having a daughter, I have quite a bit of experience with that. As I said, I'm new at cultivating ethical behavior and decisions in colleagues, faculty, and staff. But there is one recent incident that occurred where I helped out another teacher. As I've said before, I work in two very different schools. One is in a middle class area of town. The other is in a economically challenged area of town. And my secondary school, the economically challenged one, the way they handle covering grade level teachers when they're gone, when we don't have any subs, they pull a specialty teacher to cover that class all day. Well, that causes us to have to shuffle our whole schedule for the rest of the semester. Especially being an art teacher, I only see my kids for 45 minutes once a week. So if they lose a day, that's a whole week for them of art. It really messes it up. My primary school has a much better process. The office staff takes the time to go through each specialty teacher's schedule and divvies up the time between most of them, not all of them. They kind of shuffle them around, so we're not doing it every time. And they give each one an hour or less to cover that class during our plan time. So we're still able to see our kids that day. We don't have to shuffle around our schedule. And they make sure that we fill out a form that pays us extra for that hour. So the teacher that I was talking to about this, who asked me about it, I told her what my other school does, and she's not so sure the way her school handles it is exactly legal. So we've started researching it, going through contracts and policies. We're still in the process of that, but talking to other teachers at other schools, it sounds like they may not be doing it correct, and we may be able to change that permanently at that school. But we'll see later on down the road. Section 7, evaluating your options. There were several pros and several cons. The pros of not filling out the expulsion paper would obviously benefit David. His record would remain clean. He wouldn't be in any trouble. He wouldn't have a felony on his record. The pros of filling out the paperwork would mean that I would still have a clean record as an administrator. The pros of my option 3 seem to be the most beneficial. I wouldn't fill out the paperwork right away. I would then consult a higher authority on the issues contained in the zero tolerance policy. I think this would make a massive impact. On one hand, if a special rule gets written into this policy, I've not only helped David, but I've helped all the Davids of the future in situations like these. If it fails, I still get a reprimand, just like option 1. So option 3 seems to be the best. I still get a reprimand if it fails, but at least I tried, and I could continue fighting in the future to get that rule changed or altered. How do you address ethical behavior as it may adversely affect students and adults? I address unethical behavior in one or two ways. Currently, if it involves my students, I personally sit with them, ask them to walk me through what happened. Then after analysis, I walk them through the steps and alternatives that they could have taken instead. As I've said before, if it involves colleagues, I still confide in staff members that I am close with before addressing the behavior. Section 8, choose the best option. Consulting the core values that I hold highest that make up my moral compass while rereading the case study, I believe that decision number 3 would be the most beneficial for all stakeholders involved and the one that I would choose. Once implemented, one of 2 outcomes would occur. Either I am successful in the fight for a new rule being written into this zero tolerance policy, fixing this issue forever, freeing David from all prosecution, in turn settling James's guilty conscience, and avoiding a reprimand on my permanent record. Or I would fail, receive a reprimand, and on my permanent record, which would have happened in option 1 anyway if I simply did not fill out the paperwork. I most likely wouldn't be fired. I can live with that, knowing that I made the most ethical decision, the right choice. How do you employ ethical decision-making practices regarding policies? Regarding our district policies, I typically follow them no matter what, because I'm new, I don't know. Unless they're drastically unethical to me, I have no idea if they're right or wrong. I know all the other teachers follow them, so I typically don't question them. But after all of these courses, I have a lot more experience and knowledge that I can see in our policies, and if something comes up, I know how to follow through in seeing if it is truly ethical. In my district, for example, one of the policies I have had difficulty understanding surrounds our days off allocation. I have started questioning some policies. This was the main one that came up. In my district, I have accrued only 4 personal days over the last couple of years. But I have 15 sick days accrued. To me, this is just asking for employees to use sick days instead of personal days. And this, to me, would be a huge problem. When you use a sick day, you can call in an hour before. And that really, especially now with the sub shortage, that really puts pressure on, the staff, the office staff, other teachers, specialty teachers that have to cover. It just seems like a mess. I believe that they should have a 50-50, or at least, 3/4 sick and 1/4 personal days off. But I get, I think, 1 personal day off a semester, which is fine, but I think 1 or 2 more personal days and a couple less sick days would make much more sense and would save a lot of headache. Section 9, imagine implementing your decision. The initial step that I would take, as I said, is to not fill out the paperwork to suspend David. Then I would immediately contact my principal to confide in their opinion. Depending on the guidance that my principal gives, I would either follow his advice, if it seems most beneficial in my goal to fight this case, or seek out the assistance of a higher authority's advice. From there, I would either follow guidance coming from each administrator, climbing higher and higher in the chain of command until I am able to present my case effectively. Or I would continue to find my own path to success if each individual's guidance leads to a dead end. After speaking to the director of secondary education, I would confide in him to see if there's any possible way to sway his decision. If there appears to not be, then I would accept the reprimand and continue to dive into my own research on the issues surrounding the zero tolerance policy until I find my solution or I have exhausted all opportunities. With choosing decision number 3, the 2 likely outcomes would either be that I succeed and there is a rewrite of the policy, or I would fail and get a reprimand. I believe that the most important individuals that need to be informed or involved in implementing the action plan or decision would be my principal, district administrators, and possibly a higher authority at the local law enforcement department. Section 9 continued. I believe that I would address the two students on my own in this situation to attempt a logical solution. But the individual, I believe that I could. But the individual that matters the most in this case appears to be unapproachable on a personal level. The school's police officer would be the most significant stakeholder to deal with in this issue. However, from reading the case study, this participant appears to be very strict and plays solely by the book when dealing with ethical decisions. It is most unlikely that I would make any headway in convincing this individual that his decision is unethical on my own. Upon presenting my case, I know that addressing it with a level head, with all of my information in order and ready to present, would be a much more reasonable and beneficial approach. If I begin implementing this decision with a threatening attitude, it will more than likely not be as effective. By presenting all the reasons why this needs to happen as a warning of the harm it is causing in students like David, I will be more likely to succeed. More than likely, I would leave it at that. The outcome of my option 3 is the same outcome of option 1 if it fails. I still end up with a reprimand, but David's record remains clean, as it should have been to begin with. Of course, when all is said and done, I would continue to fight for a rewrite of the zero tolerance policy, reach out to colleagues, administrators, and higher authorities to assist me in this process, and I would also probably consume myself in my own research of laws and bylaws surrounding this issue. Here are my references, and thank you for watching.